Wrongful conviction stories have always been interesting to me. It always reminded me of one of my favorite movies, Shawshank Redemption, where a guy goes to prison and he's totally innocent. Now, I would think that stuff like that happened in the 1950s and 60s way too often, but I didn't really think about it too much in today's day and age. That is, until I started the podcast, Hell Has an Exit. Since starting Hell Has an Exit, I've been able to interview multiple guys who are wrongfully convicted of crimes they didn't commit and spent up to 20, 30 years in prison after everybody knew that they were innocent. And a lot of these guys are literally locked up in jail for just small technicalities. The story that we're going to tell is the story of Anthony Apanovitch, and this guy is literally in prison right now as we speak, even after DNA evidence was presented and freed him for more than 2 years, and he's literally back in jail because of a technicality. Not just jail, he's on death row, okay? Today we have a special guest, Anthony's attorney, Dale Baich. He's been his attorney for over 30 years.
So in 1984, Mary Ann Flynn was murdered on the near west side of Cleveland. The police investigation initially stalled out, and it took about 2.5 months before the police decided to arrest someone, and that person was Tony Apanovitch. Tony had known the victim. He painted her house, and he saw her on the day of the crime. But there was no physical evidence, no eyewitness to the crime. All that the police had was a case based on circumstantial evidence. And at the end of the day, the jury convicted Tony and sentenced him to death.
Ohio State Representative Gene Schmidt is here to help us understand the policies and process of prison and the death sentence in Ohio.
I'm a state representative. I served in the General Assembly 20 years ago. Then I served in the U.S. Congress, and now I'm back in the General Assembly. 20 years ago, when the death penalty was being decided in the House, I was very much in favor of the death penalty. But 20 years later, through a series of events, I am now against it. I met Joe D'Ambrosio, who has served 25 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and he was on death row. And it shook my foundation, and I realized that it is wrong on so many levels. Went back to the state legislature for several reasons. One was to end the death penalty.
So I am the Director of Communications for Ohioans Stop Executions.
How did you get involved abolishing the death penalty?
Yeah. So I don't have a very special story other than the fact that I've just always been horrified by the fact that our state has the authority to kill people.
What is the method of execution in Ohio currently?
It's lethal injection. I think there's a misconception that lethal injection is just like putting someone to sleep.
Mm-hmm. It's like I never knew that there was complications with lethal injection.
Complications all the time, unfortunately. Ohio has our own sordid history with botched executions with lethal injection. So this is not the humane, peaceful method that people think that it is. It's its own brand of horrific.
She was murdered between 10:30 and midnight. Mm-hmm. We didn't find this out till I was convicted and on death row for 8 years.
And what's interesting is that you actually have an alibi of witnesses that said that you were at multiple bars that night.
Right. They held me for like 2 days. They said, well, we want to keep you while we check all this out and check. And I said, yeah, go ahead. You know, they went to my house. They wanted to search it, and I signed off on it.
You let them search your house?
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Yeah. What criminal would be like, yeah, sure. They would either say, no, let me get an attorney or something.
Well, yeah. I thought if you're innocent, you don't need an attorney. That's I mean, why should you? So when I turned myself in, I was asking him, I said, why are you doing this to me? He said, I didn't do it. He said, the prosecutor did. He said, all I did was I investigated a crime and turned the evidence over to the prosecutor. He's the one that got the indictment. Mm-hmm. And I kept asking him, why me? And he said, look, Tony, he said, we had a lot of pressure from the media to get somebody. Mm-hmm. And you look worse than anybody else. I didn't expect to get found guilty. I really did not think that would happen.
You know, over the years of being in recovery and speaking at rehabs and jails and prisons. I've never actually been to a prison quite the one that Anthony was in. When I got to the prison, I just remember it looking like something out of Hogwarts. And it didn't really look like a prison in Florida. It kind of looked like an old school. And when I got to the facility, it seemed a lot more, how could I say, like, you don't want to say a prison's nice, but this prison definitely was nicer than a lot of other prisons I had been to. The warden's assistant was extremely friendly. This guy was super helpful. He kind of reminded me of like a younger Jack Black. And it was kind of interesting. Everyone at the prison was kind of happy to have us. And you would think that if someone was in prison that was there, that we're saying is basically innocent, you would think that they wouldn't want us there, or that at least that was like my first impression. But honestly, everyone in the prison seemed like pretty happy to have us and was very welcoming. Now, walking into the prison, they left us to this visitation room, and there was 2 tables, and there was this one section that looked, like great lighting and just looked like a great place to have a podcast. And I was setting up the podcast and the tripod and the cameras and everything. And Anthony walked in. And when he walked in, it kind of like threw me off guard. I was still setting up the camera, I had my back turned to him. And when I turned around, it just like really hit me. Like, wow, we're really interviewing this guy, At first, like, I tried to hug him and I realized like he was shackled from his wrists were shackled to his waist and his legs were shackled too. So he couldn't hug me back. And when he shook my hand, he had to shake it all like awkward from his waist, And that kind of was strange because I've been to prisons before. I've visited people before. And usually when they're in visitation, they're walking around. They're not shackled in visitation. And then I had imagined that he'd be sitting on the other side of the table, and they had him sit on the opposite side. And I realized because on the bottom of the table, there was actually this metal hook that they were going to shackle his feet to. So even during the interview, he was still going to be shackled. And that's when I realized, like, holy shit, this is death row. Welcome to Hell Has an Exit, and I'm your host, Bryan Alzate. Anthony, can you give us some history about yourself, where you grew up, where you're from?
Well, yeah.
What your early childhood was like?
Well, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Childhood was great. I mean, it was cool. We had Euclid Beach was open in Cleveland, and we used to go there. It was like 10 cents to take the ride. Amusement park like Cedar Point and all those.
Oh, Cedar Point was open back then?
Oh, no, but Euclid Beach is just like Cedar Point.
Oh, okay.
And it was right in Cleveland. I mean, right in the heart of Cleveland, right on the lake. And we used to go there all summer long because it was right in the neighborhood, basically. So, I mean, I had a pretty good childhood. It was okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then August 1984?
Yeah.
Your life changed.
Yeah, it sure did, man. It changed big time. And I had been in prison when I was younger. I went to prison for aggravated robbery. I got out. I went to prison in 1976. I got out in 1980. In 1980, I started. I didn't like prison. I realized that's a bad thing. So I was working. I was doing okay, but I was a young man. I was still going out drinking and running around and chasing women and stuff. I ended up getting married, and I was driving truck. I was a truck driver, and I got married. My wife had a baby, and I was starting a new business. I was trying to start a painting business in 1980. This was all in 1984. I was starting a business. Okay. My daughter was born, and my daughter was born August 12th, 1984.
Wow, so your daughter was just born?
Just born, yeah. And August, I think it was August 24th, and I painted her house. And that's how I knew the victim in this case. I had painted her house, and the day before, the day she was killed, that night, I had talked to her about doing some more work on her house. I wasn't surprised when the cops came, knocked on my door after she had been murdered. We saw it in the paper. And they asked me if I'd come down and answer questions. I said, yeah, sure, I gave them blood, hair, saliva. They asked me where I was, where I had been,
So
everything.
before you knew that, you just were trying to help out. So they didn't give a subpoena. They didn't tell you that you're being charged with anything.
No.
You voluntarily gave them blood and saliva
Right,
and
absolutely.
just to help the case because you knew you didn't do it. So you're just trying to help out.
I wasn't worried about it.
Yeah.
I gave them hair, blood. Why should I? I'm not worried. I didn't do it. So go ahead.
And who would do that? Like
Right.
what criminal would be like, yeah, sure. They would either say, no, let me get an attorney or something.
Well, yeah. I thought if you're innocent, you don't need an attorney. That's, why should you? They held me for like 2 days. They said, well, we want to keep you while we check all this out and check. And I said, yeah, go ahead. They went to my house. They wanted to search it, and I signed off on it.
You let them search your house.
Oh, yeah,
didn't-
no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had no problem with that. And they let me go. And that was it. They let me go. So,
And what's interesting is that you actually have an alibi of witnesses that said that you were at multiple bars that night.
right. Well, the thing is, though, see, at trial, there's so much I could tell you wrong about the trial, but some things need to come out. At trial, they lied about the time of death. They said she had been killed between midnight and the early hours, maybe even 6 a.m. And this is what they're telling the jury and everybody else. Well, my alibi is guaranteed all the way up till 2:30 when the bars closed, because then I went home. My wife was asleep. She don't remember me coming in. She was asleep. But the truth was she was murdered between 10:30 and midnight. We didn't find this out till I was convicted and on death row for 8 years.
Wow. So so when you're going on trial, they're telling the jury that she was killed possibly after 2:30 when the bars were closed.
Right.
And then after you're already convicted and on death row, evidence is coming out that it was clearly before 12:30.
Right. They knew it. They just hid that information. And that's not it. The only thing, there was a black hair they found. They said at trial it was laying in the area of the woman's hands, wrapped around her fingers. They made all kinds of comments about it. And they said it came from a detective or somebody.
Yeah, that it could have been a medical examiner or somebody that it fell off from. But then later on, it finds out that it was actually behind her back, right? Or behind her hand.
On her back, under her bound hands.
Under her bound hand, so it couldn't have gotten there.
Right, so whoever tied her hands, that's where the hair came from. It didn't come from no cop. And it wasn't my hair, that's for sure,
And they even asked you, like, did you dye your hair or anything like that? Yeah.
They did.
So they were even asking, like, did you dye your hair to try to get the hair to stick or something like that? So during the trial, the hair comes out and they just say, oh, well, this hair is someone else's that probably fell from a cop or something like that.
Right.
Don't worry about that.
Right.
So let me ask you, what's going through your mind when you're going through trial for this rape and murder? Do you think in your mind that it's possible that you're getting convicted?
Not really. Because, when I got arrested I didn't really get arrested for this. What happened was they secretly indicted me. And I never heard of this before, but the homicide detective called me up and said, hey, Tony, you've been indicted. You're facing the electric chair. Can you come down today and turn yourself in? We're going to hold you for trial. And I thought he was
Joking.
Yeah, so nice way to put it. So I called a lawyer. I called a lawyer. I said, hey, we check on this. He called me back and he said, yeah, man. He said, you've been indicted. You face an electric chair. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, I guess I'll be down there later then. Like I told him I'll be down later on, And I took my wife and baby over to my mom's house and dropped them off there. And I had my brother take me downtown. I got the call at noon and I went down about 4:30. When I got there, he said, oh, I'm glad you came. I was going to call you, see if you were time, because I'm ready to go home. I mean, this is a man I'm accused of rape and murder. Yeah. And he's calling me on the phone to turn he knows I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And
it's so crazy to me, just so people know. So it's like, obviously, if someone's accused of rape and murder, they don't let them know that they're going to get arrested and that they're indicted. They just show up to their house with SWAT and also, I would imagine, a police force. and they catch him. And you didn't flee. You didn't make plans of leaving. You're not trying to go to Canada. You're not trying to flee the country.
Yeah.
You just thought that it's some mix-up, and you're gonna just go and figure it out.
Well, I didn't even think about trying to run. I mean, I was upset that I had to go through it. I was mad that I had to go turn myself in, because when you're innocent, what are you gonna do? I mean, you can't run. That makes no sense. So when I turned myself in, I was asking him, I said, why are you doing this to me? He said, I didn't do it. He said, the prosecutor did. He said, all I did was I investigated the crime and turned the evidence over to the prosecutor. He's the one that got the indictment. And I kept asking him, why me? And he said, look, Tony, he said, we had a lot of pressure from the media to get somebody. And you look worse than anybody else. All your alibi witnesses are drunks. So that's why I was indicted.
Wow. So just for people listening, a lot of people would think like, well, what is the motive for the state or prosecutor to try somebody, to get someone who wrongfully convicted or something like that? But the way that I see it is that they're just trying to solve the case. So if they solve the case, do you think that's their motive?
Well, see, there's a difference between the detectives and the police trying to solve a case and the prosecutor seeking an indictment or prosecuting a case. Like the reason they need, when you get a case, a high profile case in the media where the media gets all excited about it, that puts pressure on them. And on the prosecutor's office. They're elected officials, the prosecutors. So they feel they have to get somebody, and that's what they do. They look at the worst person. Like he said, I look worse than anybody else that they had been investigating. He didn't say, well, you did it, or you're guilty. He said, I looked worse than anybody else.
You just look like someone that would have done it, and it's easy for them to pin it on you.
Yeah, it was the media pressures them.
Gotcha.
To do something. It's not like they picked me out. I made myself available because of the way I was living my life. Yeah, sure, I was trying to start a business, and I was still driving truck part-time. But I was also out in the bars every day drinking and chasing women, and I had several different girlfriends on the side. And yeah, I was married at the time and had a baby. So I wasn't
an angel Cub Scout,
right.
But you're also not guilty of the crime.
I didn't do
exactly.
This. Yeah, for sure.
What goes through your head during the trial? Because the trial was very quick compared to other murder trials.
I didn't expect to get found guilty. I really did not think that would happen. Not one witness got up on the witness stand and said they seen me anywhere near the house anytime that night. They couldn't. I was in the bar, drinking. Not one witness. And the trace evidence expert even said, well, my lawyer asked her, what physical evidence did she find to link me with the crime? And she said there was no physical evidence to link me with the murder. Period. Wow. She said that on the stand. I mean, the jury found me guilty because I guess I'm the one sitting there.
So what I've read is that one of the main things that the jury hung on was when the police officer, the detective told you, hey, you might get indicted. You called your mom to let her know what's going on. And you said, I'll call you when they indict me. And they harped on this, but later on they found out that you said if. So it was this huge thing with the when and if part.
Here's how that whole conversation came about. When I was in jail, they questioned me and they wanted to search my house, and they went and took all my clothes out of my house. I mean, they took all my clothes. And they wanted to check them. So when they let me out of jail, they said they weren't going to charge me. They let me go after the 3 days of questioning and checking my alibi. And it was about a week later. I mean, they got my clothes. I ain't got no clothes. So I call him up and I say, hey, man, when can I get my clothes? But when I call and ask for my clothes, he said, yeah, you can get them tomorrow. He said, I'm going to go pick them up tonight. You can come down tomorrow and get them. I said, all right. And he said, there's a chance you could be indicted. I said, yeah, okay, man, right. I said, sure. He said, no. He said, you could be, he said, I'm serious. He said, I just want to let you know, it's a possibility. He said, you could still be indicted for this. And I said, well, okay, if they indict me, call me, and and I'll let my mom and everybody know what's going on, and then I'll come in. And he said, yeah, okay. And that was the conversation we had. There was no when or anything. I still thought he was just, I don't know what, maybe he lied at trial, got on the witness stand and lied. And we found out 8 years after I was convicted, they had the statement that I made. He had wrote it down the way it happened.
And during the trial in the beginning, he said that he didn't have it, right?
Right. They said there was no statement.
So he says he never wrote it down. Right. It was just his word against yours. And then they found the statement later.
Yeah, they had it. They just didn't, give it up. Yeah. And they said there at trial, there was a lot of little things like that. And they said I had the same blood type as the killer. And they were saying...
So back in 1984, they don't have DNA testing yet. They only have matching a blood type.
Right.
Which a lot of people are the same blood type.
Right.
But back then, they thought it was like super rare that someone would be the same type of blood type, right?
But if you got the same blood, they're saying they know the killer's blood type, is what they're saying by this. They're saying, and I got the killer's blood type. The truth is, I had the victim's same blood type as the victim.
Yeah.
They don't know who, if they do know the killer's blood type, they never told us.
Gotcha. And then the jury is like, well, they got his blood type. He has priors. His alibi, people are drinking. She was murdered after 2:30, right when the bars were closing. But I mean, honestly, them thinking that the blood type matched back then, it was like a slam dunk. They probably were just...
It's like DNA today.
Yeah.
They found his blood at the crime scene. He did it. You know? So I don't know if the jury, I can't, I've never been mad about their decision. I just never understood it. I've never been able to understand. How in the world could they convict me? That's always bothered me. Before trial,
have any jurors ever reached out to you after all these years?
No. Before trial, they offered me a deal. They offered me, I could have got 20 to life, And what for? I didn't do nothing, you know? I mean, it's just a lot of things that you can't fight when you're sitting there and they're pointing you out. It's hard to fight them, you know? Why would you be sitting there is what the jury's thinking. Because they didn't arrest any of them.
Yeah, and there's no one else that they're looking into.
Right, so.
What was going through like your mind during the trial? Like, what are you thinking about?
Well, as I'm listening to, the witnesses, and nobody's saying anything bad about me, really. They bring in these 19 witnesses, and not one of them could point a finger at me and say I did anything, or they could say that they found evidence that I did anything. They were mostly people talking about the crime scene and how they found it, cops and EMTs and those people.
And there was a whole bunch of craziness that went on where they didn't dust for fingerprints in the bathroom. They didn't check the bathroom, all sorts of things like that. They didn't go in the basement. And then I even read somewhere that they had one of the neighbors collect some of the evidence and bring it to the police officer.
Yeah, I heard about that afterwards too.
Yeah.
I didn't know about this at trial. At trial, they hid everything from my lawyers. But I didn't expect to be found guilty. The sheriffs who escort me in and out of the courtroom back to jail, they see trials all the time. And he's at the end of the trial, when the jury went in, he saw, man, don't worry, you're going to be okay. You'll be home. Yeah. You'll be all right.
One of the sheriffs said that to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he was wrong.
Yeah. What was going through your mind when you got convicted?
Oh, wow, man. I was in shock. I mean, I really was. I couldn't believe it. I was in shock for probably a year. I mean, seriously, I couldn't think straight.
All right, guys, now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. It can be tough to train your brain to stay in problem-solving mode when faced with a challenge in life. But when you learn how to find your own solution, there's really no better feeling. A therapist can help you become a better problem solver, making it easier to accomplish your goals, no matter how big or small. If you listen to the show, you know that I always encourage people to go to therapy. A lot of people think that you have to go to therapy only if you're on drugs or suicidal, but the reality is that anybody can go to therapy at any point in time and get a better perspective on their life. Oftentimes, there's no better person than a professional therapist that can help you see the good things in your life. Oftentimes, or friends or family, all these outside people, when they say things that maybe they're saying the same thing a therapist is saying, it just doesn't reach me. And for me, a third party that is unbiased is probably the best person to give me advice. Therapy has changed my life. It's changed my friends' lives around me. And oftentimes you don't need to go forever, but I went to therapy for like 6 or 8 months, once a week. And I truly believe it was one of the most impactful things that I've done since getting clean. If you're thinking about giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, it's accessible, it's affordable, and entirely online. Get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey and switch therapists at any time. When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/exit today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/exit. Thank you guys. Have a good day. And did you immediately go on death row?
Yeah, let's see. I got found guilty. Then a couple weeks later, they did the hearing on the death sentence or not. And see, that's another thing. When you're innocent, you can't put up evidence of mitigation. If you commit a crime, the way it's set up, when someone who's guilty of murder and they have the death penalty on them, they can bring witnesses in to say, hey, look, when he was a kid, he got hit in the head with a bat. He's got, he's got issues. And it's legitimate. Sometimes there's people that have issues, that commit crimes. But if you're innocent, what are you going to tell them? They already thought I'm guilty. When do I get up there and say, hey, I didn't do it?
Yeah.
It's too late.
Yeah, at least when you confess to something you did,
Right.
You can say, well, I did it because of X, Y, and Z, and I had a troubled past or whatever. When you didn't do it, there's nothing really to say.
Yeah, you get up there and say, please spare my life. But I never said that.
Yeah. What was death row like compared to the first time you went to prison?
Oh, it's
Totally different.
Yeah, death row today is completely different than what it was
back then.
Almost 40 years ago. I mean, yeah, it was new. Death row was new then, and it was lockdown. I mean, that's it. You got out 1 hour a day.
1 hour a day. 3
showers a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You're locked up on weekends, and yeah, that was it.
What was that first year like for you? Were you thinking that you're getting out? Like, are you waking up every day thinking that they're going to come and get you?
No, I'm waking up every day reading law books.
Wow.
That's what I did all day, every day. I read from 1984 to 1994. I went through every federal reporter, second reporter they had at Lucasville from 1957 to 1994. When I sent for some more books, they said, well, those haven't been printed yet. So I went through that many law books. I mean, I was looking, trying to figure out, because I couldn't figure out how I could be there. I just couldn't understand it. It drove me crazy.
And when did you get linked up with Dale, who has been your attorney on the case since 1991? How'd you guys?
After the Ohio Supreme Court denied my appeal, I went to the federal court, and the Ohio public defenders wanted to fight to save your life, and I don't care about that. I'm saying, no, I want to go home. You got to fight to prove I'm innocent. I didn't do this. I'm trying to get out of here. Right, I didn't do it. I don't care about the sentence. If they're not going to let me go, they can kill me. What do I want to spend my life in prison? Walking around for the next 40, 50 years with people. I didn't commit no crime with a bunch of, this ain't right. Yeah. And I had a execution date in 1991.
They did give you an execution date.
Yeah, I think it was November 12th or 5th or somewhere around there.
And what does that feel like, knowing that you have an execution date?
Yeah, what are you going to do? I mean, I can't explain it. It was like whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I use this all the time when people say, I don't know how you get through each day. I tell them, I say, well, I can bang my head on the wall and I can scream and yell. I can do that every day and holler, please let me out, let me out. And by the end of the day, I'm going to have a sore head and a sore throat. It ain't going to do no good. So you just got to deal with it.
Were you in prison telling people like, I'm innocent, I didn't do it? Or
Yeah.
And what would people say?
Well, I don't, they were polite.
They're polite, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not, it's not like they believed me or didn't believe me. They were like, yeah, okay. I don't know if they believe me or not. It's hard to say. But they know now. Yeah. Because I got out. DNA, right.
Yeah. What's going on with your current wife at the time? Is she supporting you when you're in prison? At the time?
At the time, well, yeah. She was 22 with a baby. And her husband just got sentenced to death. So she had to move home, get a job, support herself and the baby. And she stuck with me until the Ohio Supreme Court denied my appeals. We're thinking I'm going to get out. But
how many years was that?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, and then it was time for her. She had to move on. She had to get her life together. And me, I had to fight this.
Wow.
He had a lawyer appointed by the court up in Cleveland, and he actually had 2 lawyers, and those lawyers had just completed another death penalty case, and they jumped into Tony's case. They really did not do much to prepare for trial, and at the end of the day, the jury convicted Tony and sentenced him to death. He appealed that decision, and in 1987, the Ohio Supreme Court, in a 4-3 opinion, upheld his conviction and death sentence.
Wow.
That meant that 3 justices had problems with his conviction and had reasonable doubt about his guilt.
Wow. And then later on, the Supreme justices have written since then letters stating that they believe that after all these years, it's like one of the only cases that they kind of regret the way they voted.
The justice who wrote the majority opinion sent a letter to the Ohio Parole Board in 1996 saying that he now had residual doubt about Tony's guilt.
Wow.
And recommended to the parole board that they commute his death sentence. And in March of 2022, the justice who wrote the dissenting opinion sent a letter to the parole board and said that Tony, that he believed that there was doubt about Tony's guilt and he should be released from prison.
Wow. Can you explain the if and when statement that was such a big deal?
Sure. When the police were conducting their investigation and interviewing Tony, and he voluntarily met with the police on a number of occasions, Tony said to the police officer, if I'm indicted, can you call me and let me know so I could tell my mother? At trial, that detective testified that when Tony called, he said, when I'm indicted, can you give me a call?
Kind of implying that was some type of form of admission.
The detective said he was shocked. The prosecutor said, Apanovitch said, when he's indicted, and that suggests that he was guilty. The defense lawyer made an issue of it when the detective made the statement. He asked the judge to order the state to turn over the notes that the detective took. The judge said no, but ordered the prosecutor to look through the documents to see if there was something written about what Tony said. The prosecutor avowed there is nothing in the record to reflect Tony's statement. What we found a couple years later, when we got documents under the State Public Records Act, was that in fact there was a document, and that document said, if I'm indicted.
So they actually did come out with records stating that it was written and documented that he said if.
Yes. So the detective made a false statement when he testified, and the prosecutor made a false statement to the judge when he said, I looked through these documents and I did not see any reference to that statement.
It's just a very dark environment, prison is. It's not a fun place to be. Even when you visit it, when you leave, you almost want to take a shower and shake the things that you've seen away. And yet living your life there is what should happen to the most heinous crimes.
Can we talk about the bill that you introduced, 586, and how that would affect not just this case, but future case going forward?
Well, what it would allow is your attorney to present the evidence, period. It would give more leeway for how new evidence can be presented. And the second part of the bill would allow it to be retroactive, which is the harder nut to crack, because in Ohio, retroactivity in law is very rare. All parties would have to agree to it. And currently, the county prosecutors across Ohio don't want to do that. And we have no way to get him out of that environment without the governor absolving, giving clemency.
What was the first, couple of years like? What are you doing? What's your day-to-day like? What's
Reading law books and working out.
That's it.
Seriously, that's it, man. I spent from 1984, when I got to death row, I spent all that time reading law books and writing letters to my lawyers. When Dale got put on my case in 1991, he came to see me and he said, look, you write me, I'm going to write you back within, give me 7-8 business days to write you back, and I will. Dale was different. He cared about his job. And and I would write him constantly, and I'm sending him stuff, and I'm trying to discuss issues and that. And I gave him a hard time. Yeah,
and I feel like people that are guilty at the end of the day, after a couple of years, they probably just accept the crime or accept the time that they get, So I think that the fact that you're just continuously trying day in and day out shows that, don't have a guilty conscience, that you just really feel like this is a total injustice to you.
Oh yeah, definitely. And especially now. I mean, when I got out, I wasn't hating nobody. I wasn't hating the police, the prosecutors. I felt vindicated. All these years I've been saying I didn't do it. And they had that DNA evidence and they hid it for 10 years. I could have got out in 2001, which is like 16 years before I got out almost.
Yeah, that's crazy.
They hid that evidence.
So let's back up and talk about the slides. So I know that I think it was like 2008 they tested them. When did they first?
2001 they tested those slides.
In 2001, so at the lab, I believe this is just what I've read. So at the lab, there is slides from the murder that they find in a drawer.
Yeah, they said they found them in a drawer, but that's not the slides. That's not the DNA that set me free. See, in 1989, the federal court in a rape case in Florida, they used DNA in Florida for the first time in the United States was in 1985 in Florida. In 1989, he had been appealing it, and his lawyer said this is junk science because it's the first time ever used in this country. And
but in other countries, they've been doing this?
Well, England, They used it in 1983 to prove a man was innocent and to catch a guilty man who had raped and killed some young girls in England.
Okay.
So in 1989, the federal court said this is good science, and yes, it can be used. So my lawyer, Tom Shaughnessy, 3 days after that decision came out, filed a request for DNA testing. I was the very first person on Ohio's death row to request DNA testing.
Okay.
And they started lying right then and there. The state did, the prosecutors say, oh, we threw it away. We don't have to keep it. Once his state appeals were over, we could throw it away. And in the federal courts have ruled they can do that.
Wow. So in 1984, they're legally allowed to throw away evidence
After, yeah.
that hasn't been tested for DNA.
Well, up till that point.
They weren't doing that.
Yeah, they didn't have to.
So from 1984 up to 2000 and what? You thought that this evidence wasn't even existed?
We didn't know it existed. They knew it existed. They'd been lying. See, they kept saying, we don't have it. We don't have it. We threw it away. I think it's Youngblood versus Arizona was a federal case where the courts agreed that, yeah, states don't have to because with all the crimes every year, they'd have to rent warehouses and stuff, so they don't have to.
Wow.
Yeah, so we didn't know, but they had this. They know they had the DNA. They finally sent it out to get tested in 2000.
What prompted them to finally send it out?
I don't know. You know, it was fighting my appeals in federal court. I'm still telling them I'm innocent. I'm still arguing.
So they eventually say, okay, let's send it out for DNA testing.
Well, they didn't tell us.
Okay, so they tested it and didn't tell you that they tested it.
They didn't tell us it existed at all.
Wow.
They just went ahead and did a secret testing, got the results, and thought, oh, wow, he is innocent. Hide that.
So when the results came back, just to be clear, it was not a match.
Oh, absolutely not. Without a doubt. Not me. No, 100% not me. And they hid that. In the federal court, there was a subpoena for DNA records. The federal judge sent it out. And Dale was deposing the medical examiner. And she brought she brought her records with her. The DNA records, all her records with her. Dale didn't tell me. All Dale told me was, he said, we got some more DNA records. He said, it might be something good. I'll let you know. I'll let you know. And he kept telling me that for weeks. I called him every week and bugged him. I swear, I drove him crazy. And one day they told me, they said, Apanovitch on a speaker, you got an attorney visit. I said, what? I said, I just talked to my attorney Friday. I said, who is it? Because I'm thinking it might be the one from Cleveland. Okay. And it was Dale. So I go out there. I said, what's up, Dale? He hands me a document, and a report. He said, here, read this. So I start reading the first page, and I got through the first paragraph, and he said, okay. He said, you see what that is? I said, yeah, it's a DNA report. What's going on? He said, well, now go to paragraph 12. So I turn the pages, I go to paragraph 12, and they're talking about the DNA sample, one such and such, whatever, blah, 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 is not a match to Anthony Apanovitch.
Wow.
I said, wait a minute, dude.
So that right there proves that you didn't do the rape and you didn't do the murder.
Right. One person committed this crime.
Yeah.
Man, when I read, I couldn't believe that. And he flew there.
What year was this?
This was 2009. He flew up by then he had been in Arizona working at the Federal Public Defenders, and he flew up to show me that. And it still took a while to get me home, about
How long?
7 years.
7 years after they found the DNA
Right.
slides.
Well, the prosecutor fought it every bit of the way. I mean,
and it's the same prosecutor from 1984?
No, he retired and died of a heart attack 6 months later in 97.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So what happens when, so 7 years later, it goes to the Supreme Court?
No, we go to the trial court.
Okay, so you have trial court, and then what does the judge say?
Well, you remember the slides you were talking about? You said the slides they found in a drawer.
In the drawer, okay.
Well, they've been saying for years that they have slides that they tested that doesn't clear me, so that proves I'm guilty. Okay, DNA. So we got a DNA hearing set up. We filed for a hearing on the DNA, 2014. And we finally get into court, and the judge, we got our expert there. We've got their documents that they tested. And the judge asked the prosecutor, okay, you got DNA? Because they're telling the judge they got DNA in everything they file to fight to stop me from getting a hearing.
Okay.
And the judge said, how many days are you going to need? And they said, oh, no, Your Honor, we're not bringing it in. See, what they have is not real. It's not what they're saying it is, and they know it. They can't bring it into court, and they don't. At a DNA hearing, to prove I'm guilty of a crime that you're saying you've got DNA that proves I'm guilty, that's where you bring the DNA evidence in. But see, if they bring it in there, the judge is going to end up throwing it out because it's not what they're telling everybody it is. They could say they have DNA. They could say anything they want out of their mouth. They can file a motion in court and make any claim they want. But when you come to court, bring the evidence, and they told the judge, no, they don't have any DNA to bring in.
Wow.
But we had their DNA, and the judge said, without a doubt, it proved I was innocent.
Welcome to the Genesis House powered by the United Recovery Project. Located in sunny South Florida, we offer drug and alcohol addiction treatment as well as a major focus on dual diagnosis. Our addiction therapy programs include behavioral therapy, 12-step facilitation, psychotherapy, life skills training, and more. At our facility, you can expect a low client-to-staff ratio, daily group therapy, weekly one-on-one therapy sessions, and luxury amenities such as volleyball, basketball, pool, chiropractor, personal trainer, yoga, massage therapy, and more. Contact the United Recovery Project today and let's create a better tomorrow.
There was no doubt whatsoever.
And that's when they let you out.
And that's when I got out.
When did you get out from that trial? How many days after?
Well, from that hearing, I was going to get out within a couple days. But the prosecutor appealed it, and I spent a year.
Another year after
in the county jail.
After the judge had said there's no way you could have done this.
Right. I still had to spend a year in jail. And a year later, the appeals court said, oh, yeah, this is fine. The judge did the right thing. The evidence, the DNA proves he didn't do it. So I got out that day. When they did that, I got out that afternoon. It was on a Friday, too.
Tell me what getting out was like.
Oh, man, wow. That was the coolest thing ever. I mean, I got out. It was I remember it was 7:45 at night, because I remember looking at the clock as I walked down the hall to exit the Justice Center in Cleveland. My ex-wife from my first wife, I've been married 3 times. My first wife, we were teenagers, got married and divorced as teenagers. Her and her husband were out there waiting for me.
Wow. So let me tell you something. So, so people listening, these are people that probably know you the most intimate of anybody on the planet.
Oh, absolutely.
And they have zero inkling that they think that you did it, and they wouldn't be supporting you after all these years. Yeah. So the people that love you and know you since childhood are there 32 years later?
Yeah. Wow. This is we were married and divorced within like about a year.
So you guys were only married a year, and after 32 years...
Well, we do have a son together.
Oh, yeah, so she's been in your life.
We've talked on but my life, I was in prison. I was locked up, and I'd talk to her, I'd talk to her, I'd talk to my son, I'd talk to her other 2 daughters at her house. We were friends. She got married. I became friends with her husband, and I went and lived with them when I got out.
So when you got out, they let you to live with them?
They took me out to Canton, and I moved in with them.
Wow. Yeah, so I mean,
people.
if anybody was to think that you actually committed this crime, they're not letting you stay at their house.
Oh, yeah, Diane and Ken, they wouldn't let nobody in their house.
Yeah.
He's got his daughter's a special needs, autistic.
Wow.
And, me and her, we're cool, yeah.
So tell me, when you get out, what's the drive like? Where do you guys go when you first get out?
Well, we headed to their house.
Straight to their house?
In Canton. And she's showing me how to use the phone. I've never used one of them.
Like iPhone.
Yeah, it's a new, yeah. And she calls my cousin. And well, we're crying. And so we're talking, and the whole ride home, I'm talking to my cousin, and I didn't even realize that an hour had gone by, and now we're pulling in the driveway.
Wow.
So we get to the house, and I reach over to open the door, and I'm like, how do I get out of here? I couldn't find, the door handles the way they had them. They weren't like the old cars, you pulled it up.
Pull it?
Yeah, it's up under there somewhere.
You got to flip it up or something?
Yeah.
So you couldn't open the car door?
I didn't know how to get out of the car.
Wow.
So they had to show me. And we went in the house, and one of the very first things was they made me a cup of coffee. And they gave me a spoon for my sugar. And I couldn't believe how heavy that spoon was, man.
Because you've used the plastic.
Plastic for 32 years.
Wow.
It was a surreal moment. And my daughter came out with my granddaughter, and friends showed up. I mean, we were up till like 2:30 in the morning, 3 o'clock, and finally everybody left, and we went to bed. And I was up at 6:30 in the morning again, and I was wide awake, and it's really weird. This first morning, I get a cup of coffee, and Ken, Diane's husband, he's sitting in the lounge chair watching the news, and I walk over to the sliding doors that lead out onto the deck, and I'm standing there and I'm looking at trees and grass, something you don't get to see a lot of. And he said, you can open that door and go out if you want to.
Wow.
And I said, oh, yeah, okay. So I opened the door up, and it was.
Sorry.
When I got out there, I'm standing there with the coffee, and I'm just looking. And I got tears running down. It was unreal. I mean, I was in prison, in jail, and I woke up a free man. Finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you ate when you got out?
Cheeseburger.
Cheeseburger?
With that cup of coffee.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
How did that taste?
Oh, it was good.
It was good.
Real hamburger.
Yeah. What was, so you were out for 2.5 years, a free man. What did you do in those 2.5 years?
The first 6 months I lived with Diane and Ken. And then Beth, my wife now, I had known her for 20 years.
Yeah.
She had been visiting me all the time.
Yeah, so it's an interesting love story.
Yeah.
So how did you meet Beth?
When she was in college learning, she was doing a paralegal course. And one of her assignments was to write about a case in Ohio, a criminal case, and write a synopsis of it or something, short story or whatever you call it. And she saw my case, read it, and wrote me and said, I read your case. I just had to write. She explained she's doing it. She said, I just don't understand. If you don't want to write, I understand. She said, but I don't understand how you're there. What happened? How did that happen? Because if you look at the evidence, there is none. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors and finger pointing, and that's it. And that's how we started. That was like right around 2000, and we became friends, and ever since we've been together. And 6 months after I got out, I asked her to marry me, and she said, "Yeah, are you sure, man?" We didn't want to get married while I was in prison, because that's a whole different relationship. And when I first got out, of course, she came to the house, and she said, "Look, you're not normal yet.
Acclimate, yeah.
Right, you got to become a human being again, and then we'll talk about it." See, I didn't get to raise my daughter. I didn't get to raise my son. but I got to raise those two girls, my granddaughters now. And for those 2.5 years I was out there that I got to be with them, man, that's like, wow.
Yeah, and we've talked to people that have known you for those 2.5 years, and no one's saying that you were bitter or angry, and it seems like you were just happy to be free.
Well, yeah, I don't know why. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was pleased that I finally I felt vindicated. I finally proved my innocence, and I'd been telling people for years. And even though the prosecutor could have did the right thing, and I could have got out many years earlier, I wasn't going to live today in prison or in court with the prosecutor arguing in my head about what they did wrong. When I woke up in the morning, I was living that day to the fullest. That's the way I looked at life out there when I, just.
What has helped you mold that type of mentality?
I don't know, maybe my faith in God probably is what I'm figuring.
You're a religious man?
I don't know, I wouldn't say religious, I would say is strong in faith, very strong in faith.
When you realized that you were going back to prison, what was that like?
Well, I didn't realize it until they kidnapped me. Here's what happened. I found out that I was probably going to get locked back up. We'd have to go back, have more hearings, because the Ohio Supreme Court said that it was the DNA didn't matter. And they basically
said that the judge didn't have the jurisdiction?
I'll tell you exactly what they said. I did bring something with me.
Okay.
This is what I got a quote from them, the Ohio Supreme Court. They said, "We recognize that it may seem unduly formalistic or unfair to foreclose the trial court from considering a post-conviction claim that is based on DNA testing that the state itself procured. But it is the prerogative of the General Assembly, not this court, to set the terms by which an offender may pursue post-conviction relief." What that is, there's the law for DNA states very clearly that I have to ask the prosecutor, would you test the DNA to see if I'm innocent? Because I say I'm innocent, right? And then I can use that DNA to get out.
In court.
But because the prosecutor did a sneaky DNA
without
test,
telling you.
Right, and didn't tell nobody and hid it, I didn't ask them. They're saying because I didn't ask them to do it, because they did it on their own, secretively, I couldn't use it. The hearing we had on the DNA was moot, didn't happen.
What do you think happened later on that, kept him in jail for so long?
Well, in any criminal case and in a death penalty case, there are a number of appeals that take place. And we pursued those appeals in Tony's case. And all along the way, the courts did not take a deep dive into the facts or relied on procedural limitations to avoid looking at the facts closely.
Okay. So in 2000, the staff at the lab, the medical examiners, find slides just randomly, and then they asked to test it themselves, right?
Yes. They asked their boss if they could test the material. They did not call us. They knew that we represented Tony. There was active litigation going on at the time. So they do the testing and they hide those results. And it wasn't until 2008 when they turned those results over to us.
Through a subpoena.
Through discovery, in federal habeas corpus proceedings. And what we learned was that those test results excluded Tony from the rape. And we finally got into state court to litigate that issue. And in 2015, a judge found that DNA evidence, and because it was a single assailant theory during the trial, Tony was also excluded from the murder.
I got in touch with his attorney, and I met with the attorney. I investigated the case, and then I have met several times with Tony himself. And I know that he's innocent. The unfortunate thing is that the DNA that was there at the initial trial that they chose, the prosecutor chose not to not to use, that would have proven his innocence at the beginning, was finally discovered in an appeal through his attorney. When the attorney was having a deposition with the county coroner, and it clearly proved that if it's a rape murder case and it's a single individual, if you didn't do the rape, guess what? You didn't do the murder. And so he was released with prejudice back into society. And so it was 3 years out, got married, became part of a wonderful family, and the prosecutors in Cuyahoga County were livid, and they were looking, since it's with prejudice, if you can find some way to get him back into prison, you can do it. And they discovered the error was that Tony didn't request the DNA, and with that, he was thrown back to death row with no escape.
We've gotten it wrong 11 times that we know of. We have 11 death row exonerees in Ohio, okay? That's 11 times that we've already almost executed an innocent person. People that spent 10, 20, 30 years on death row. Our appeals process in Ohio is not set up to find mistakes. It's set up to look at the procedure and make sure that the procedure was followed accurately.
They say the General Assembly in Ohio has to change the law.
Well,
and hopefully that's going to happen. Representatives Gene Schmidt and Terrence Upchurch sponsored a bill to amend the law, to change it so that it doesn't matter who.
Yeah, because if it gets found on the sidewalk, who cares? You know, if they have DNA testing saying that you're innocent, it shouldn't matter who asked for it or who got it or how someone found it, you know?
Right, it shouldn't. And that's what they're doing now. They're going to change
I also read that two people, I think they were Supreme Court justices, had wrote letters stating that they believe now with more evidence that you're innocent.
Yeah. I know, ain't that something?
Yeah. So two people that were involved in the Supreme Court.
People that denied my appeal.
So these are Supreme Court justices that denied your appeal, have individually, on their own, wrote letters stating that now that all this new evidence is out, that they truly believe that you should be released and you're innocent.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. That's pretty cool. That I thought was, I mean, I'm almost at a loss for words how to describe what I feel, because, these are an Ohio Supreme Court justice. We're not talking about some
juror
clerk or
whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
He's the guy that looked at my case and said, no, I couldn't get a new trial because the evidence was sufficient for finding me guilty at that time before the DNA came out, and all the other evidence that they lied about too as well.
What has it been like the second time coming back to prison?
The ones that see me come back, they just can't believe, what are you doing back? Well, I thought the DNA, and I tell them, I say, yeah, me too, I don't know.
And how many years have you been back now?
We're going on 4 years, man.
Going on 4 years.
Yeah. It's harder this time. These 4 years are harder than the first 32. Because those first 32, I'm fighting to prove my innocence, This time, I don't know what to do. I mean, I've been in limbo for 4 years. Why? Why am I still sitting here? I don't understand it. It makes no sense. We filed a petition for clemency. I'm asking for one of two things. I would like a pardon because I'm innocent and the evidence shows it, And at the very least, just give me time served, reduce my sentence to time served, and just let me go back home. You know, I mean, I didn't do nothing.
We're not really trying to find whether someone is guilty or not. We're trying to find whether or not the court proceeding was according to, you know, what we say it's supposed to be.
What is going on now with the case, and what do you hope happens to get him back out?
In April of 2022, we filed a clemency application with the Ohio Parole Board. And in that application, we laid out the facts of the case and made the argument that there is an innocent man on death row. We asked the board to
Appreciate you. Thank you.
A lot of people ask me like, oh, could you tell he was innocent? Like, I don't believe that you could just look at someone in the eyes and tell that they were innocent. But there's so many facts in the case that regardless of what Anthony's demeanor was like, it just proves that this man didn't do the crime. This was the first time where like we really felt like we were on a mission. And the fact that we were able to visit this man and see him in prison, to talk to him and share this story on the podcast on a platform that, you know, saves lives, in my opinion, you know, it's one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of.